You ever find yourself in a situation where your emotions completely hijack you? Like you're at a party and someone's stumbling around, slurring their words, convinced they're the funniest person in the room. Meanwhile, you're standing there, heart racing, fighting the urge to get up and get the hell out of there. Now, here's the kicker. This person isn't doing anything to you directly, yet your reaction feels bigger than the moment. What's up with that? Turns out, these moments, what we call emotional triggers, often have roots way deeper than we realize. Today, I'm sharing a story that hits close to home about how a seemingly simple situation, like being around intoxicated people, uncovered a wound I didn't even know that I had, and how that realization changed everything for me. But first, hi, welcome to the Wolverine Lifestyle Podcast, where personal growth meets deep thought and introspection. I am your host, Dylan Andres, and today we're diving into a journal prompt that's all about recognizing emotional triggers and uncovering the wounds beneath them. The prompt is, what situations trigger a strong emotional reaction in you? What is the underlying wound? I'll be walking you through my personal experience with this question, how it led me to unexpected discoveries about my past, and why understanding our triggers can be a game changer in our healing journey. So let's get into it. First up, let's set the stage. What are emotional triggers? Before we get into the nitty-gritty of my story, let's talk about emotional triggers for a moment. What are they, really? A trigger is basically anything. A situation, a comment, a sight, hell, even a smell that sets off a chain reaction in our mind. It's like our body presses play on an emotional mixtape we didn't even know we had queued up and ready to go. And these reactions, they're not random. They're often tied to unresolved wounds or experiences we've carried for years. For me, one of those triggers is being around overly intoxicated people. It's not the usual annoyance that some people feel. It's this overwhelming emotional reaction. I didn't fully understand why until I started peeling back these layers. And that's the thing about triggers. They're like little breadcrumbs leading us to the deeper truths about ourselves. So let's rewind back to when this all started for me. Growing up, my dad was an alcoholic, but he wasn't what you might immediately picture when you think of an alcoholic. He wasn't smashing plates or yelling at anyone. In fact, most of the time, he was just out in the garage with a drink in his hand and cracking jokes he thought were pure gold. His humor was, and still is, this quirky mix of Tim Allen and Eddie Murphy. The kind of thing that made you roll your eyes as a kid, but laugh anyways. At the same time, I thought, that's just dad. I didn't realize how much it shaped me until much later in life. I even spent 5 years working in the nightclub industry in my mid-20s. A world where being surrounded by intoxicated people was just another day at the office. You'd think it would have desensitized me, but it didn't. If anything, it magnified my discomfort. Every overly enthusiastic laugh, every slurred word, every stumble, it all grated on my nerves in ways I couldn't quite explain. Looking back, the irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, willingly placing myself in an environment that triggered me almost daily. But why? What was I hoping to gain? Or perhaps avoid by staying there? Well, I can tell you I learned very quickly to build these energetic walls around me to protect myself. I was learning to not take on other people's problems as my own. The funny thing was, I didn't realize I learned this skill until I reflected on that time of my life. Believe it or not, that chapter of my life working in the nightclubs is one of my most cherished experiences. I would not be who I am today if I did not get the opportunity to work there. Actually, my entire coaching business is a tribute to what I had to overcome in myself by choosing to stay there as uncomfortable as it was. At that time, I had zero self-confidence. It was difficult for me to even have a conversation with an attractive woman, even if there was no romantic interest there. And to confront someone twice my size who is a part of a biker gang, well, the thought really didn't bring me a whole hell of a lot of peace. And I wasn't there for very long before they put me into a supervisor position, and then into a management position. I was an insecure, depressed, emotionally blunted shell of a man, leading a security team to protect the staff, patrons, and the property. And it was overcoming all that that earned me the nickname Wolverine, hence the name, the Wolverine lifestyle. I discovered what I was capable of overcoming. I discovered my courage to be confident. I discovered that I could put myself into some deeply uncomfortable positions and situations as long as I knew the people around me who I cared about were going to be safe. I learned that by simply making the choice to do so, I can overcome the limitations of my mind. And that's where the Wolverine lifestyle was born. To show you that if I can overcome these limitations in myself, you can too. Okay, we're going to scooch up the timeline to the spring of 2022. I was going through what I now recognize as a bit of an identity crisis. Emotionally, I was all over the place. It felt like every step forward was met with a wall I couldn't break through. Then one day at work, the mail lady, someone I had only exchanged simple, polite good mornings with, stopped and asked me what was wrong. The timing was almost eerie because I was in one of the worst funks to date. She asked me a series of questions that hit so close to home, it felt like she had been reading my mind or was a fly on the wall for the entire situation. And then she said something that completely changed the trajectory of my healing. You should look into Al-Anon. And for those of you who do not know, Al-Anon is a support group for people affected by somebody else's drinking. At first I thought, that's not for me. That's not what I need. My dad's drinking wasn't that bad, but something in my gut told me to give it a shot. So I did. My first meeting was virtual. This was still during the tail end of those lost years, we'll call it, that we just went through. And I was just a fly on the wall. I listened to all the other people share their stories, and it was like hearing echoes of my own life. People were talking about things I hadn't even fully admitted to myself. The emotions, the self-doubt, the confusion about why certain situations felt so heavy, it all resonated. And for the first time, I realized just how deeply my dad's drinking actually had impacted me. The thing is, I always knew my dad's drinking affected me in some sort of way, but I didn't understand the depth of it. I didn't see how much of my worldview, my sense of safety, and even my self-worth was shaped by growing up adjacent to alcoholism. I no longer felt alone in this. For the first time, I felt seen, understood, and validated. It was cathartic in a way I hadn't expected. This newfound understanding actually shook the foundation of my personal development. I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about who I was. This period of my life, often referred to as the dark night of the soul, was both terrifying and transformative. I had to rebuild myself, piece by piece, brick by brick, a version of myself that felt more authentic. It wasn't easy. However, it was 100% necessary. Here's the part that really threw me for a loop. Even when there's no overt abuse, no yelling, no violence, being around alcoholism can still leave scars. It's like this invisible weight we carry. For me, it manifested as hyper-awareness. I'd always be scanning situations, trying to gauge if things were about to go off the rails. Even though my dad wasn't a belligerent drunk, there was this unpredictability to his behavior that made me feel like I always had to be on guard, which actually ended up being a solid skill to have working in the nightclubs. This constant vigilance followed me into adulthood. It shaped how I approached relationships, how I handled stress, and even how I viewed myself. And that's the tricky part about emotional wounds. They're not always obvious. They're these subtle, insidious forces that color our perception of the world. What really hit me was how much I had internalized. Without even realizing it, I developed this belief that I had to fix everything, that I was somehow responsible for keeping the peace. It's not something my dad ever explicitly told me. It's just a dynamic I picked up on. And that belief bled into so many areas of my life, creating stress and burnout. I never did see it coming. Recognizing this wound was the first step in my healing. But the real breakthrough came when I started to shift my perspective. I stopped seeing my dad's drinking as this thing that happened to me and started understanding it for what it was. His own coping habit, his own struggle. That shift helped me forgive him on a deeper level. It also helped me forgive myself. For years, I'd been holding on to this unspoken resentment, not because I hated my dad. On the contrary, I love my dad, and I thank and credit him very much for the man I am today. But because I didn't know how else to process what I was feeling, once I understood where those feelings were coming from, it was like a weight was lifted off of my chest. This is why recognizing our triggers is so important. They're not just emotional reactions, they're roadmaps. They point us toward the places in ourselves that need healing. And when we lean into that discomfort, we're giving ourselves the chance to grow in ways we never thought possible before. So what's the takeaway here? Emotional triggers are like a check engine light. They're not there to make us feel bad or weak. They're there to inform and guide us towards the parts of ourselves that need attention and care. For me, being triggered by intoxicated people wasn't about the person in front of me. It was about unresolved feelings tied to my dad's drinking. And once I recognized that, I was able to start healing and letting that go. Now, I want to leave you with the same journal prompt that sparked this journey for me. What situations trigger a strong emotional reaction in you? What is the underlying wound? Take some time to sit with that question. You might be surprised by what comes up. And if this episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear your story. What triggers have you recognized in your life, and how have they shaped you? Reach out to me on social media or share your thoughts in a review. Let's keep this conversation going. As always, thank you for joining me for this episode of the Wolverine Lifestyle Podcast. If it resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who might need it. It's the best way to get this message out there. And if you're ready to take a step further into your own self-exploration journey, grab my free ebook, 30 Days to Know Yourself. The link will be in the show notes, along with all of the links to the rest of my socials and resources. Until next time, remember, healing starts when we face the truth with compassion, not judgment. Keep leaning into your growth and living with intention.